by regions just to limit the participation. But with us today, we have several team members. There are approximately 30 team members overall in our VMPI group. And they represent K-12, higher education. We have a member from the Office of the Secretary of Education. We also have a member from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and all have been a big part of the work of this initiative. The passion, the energy that this team exudes is just amazing. They share more than, I just can't believe how much time they give to this initiative. They're very dedicated. So I want to just kind of let you know who's with us today. So we have Ian Schenk here. He's from Hanover County Public Schools. Brian Nussbaum's from Harrisonburg City. Shelley Pine is from Prince William. Kristen can't be with us today. She has another engagement, but she is part of our team as well, and she's at the VDOE. She is a mathematics and special education specialist. And I tried to catch those who were kind of entering the meeting. Margaret Newman, she is here, and she's part of our VMPI team. Melody Bushley is from the VDOE. She's from our Office of Student Assessment, and she is part of our VMPI team. And Kara Walsh is also with us today. So we welcome everybody as we move forward with kind of talking to you about what all this is about. So on the next slide, we have an agenda. Today's agenda is going to first give you some background about VMPI and how it started through a book called Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics. We'll give you an overview of the vision of the initiative and what some of the concepts are across K-12, what they might look like as proposed in the initiative. We'll start with the middle. We'll start with grades 8 through 10, and then we'll talk about the K-7 end of it, and then we'll go forward and talk about the grades 11 and 12 proposals. We'll then give you a little bit of a brief summary of the current status of the initiative, and then we'll take some time to capture some of your feedback and closing thoughts as well. So as a reminder, if you could keep your microphone and your video, they should be disabled already as you enter the meeting. We are going to go ahead and start recording this session so that we can have a recording of the work. And we will be using the chat box today to provide you links to some documents that we have available. And we will also be requesting your feedback at times during the webinar so that you can respond to some questions that we have for you. So right now, Shelley's going to put a link into the chat box for the VMPI infographic. So you did receive this. You should have got a reminder email from me this afternoon that had this as an attached document, but Shelley's also putting it in there as well so that everybody has that. So Brian, if you could go back to the last slide just for a moment. I just wanted to let you know there's this little Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative icon. And that will show up during the presentation at times when we are speaking about one of the slides that is from that infographic. So if you see that little icon, you'll know that this is a slide that's based upon the information in your infographic. And I tell you that because I'm still 25 years old. I can see very well, not really, but I know some of us have a hard time with seeing things that are very small. So that gives you the ability to kind of blow it up and look at it in a little bit bigger screen if you choose to do so. Okay, thanks, Brian. So on the next slide, we're going to describe a little bit about what is the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative. And it is a joint initiative between the Virginia Department of Education, the State Council for Higher Education for Virginia, or SCHEV, and the Virginia Community College System. Virginia's profile of a graduate was used as a lens through which to focus a lot of our work. And the initiative seeks to redefine mathematics pathways for students. We're looking at thinking about what is it that students need to be looking at for knowledge, skills, experiences, attributes, all the things that we want our students to attain, not only to be ready for college or the workforce, but also just to be ready for life in general and have a level of mathematical literacy that we would want all citizens to have. So on the next slide, we're talking about a conversation today with mathematics pathways, and we thought the best way to do this would be to have some student voice in the process. So we did have the opportunity to interview some students, and we chose Sarah and Genevieve to kind of represent students for this particular presentation. They both successfully graduated from high schools in Virginia, and they're both now in college. So as you can see on the screen, Sarah, she's currently a geology student. She in math in high school was one grade level ahead. She was accelerated to Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And she took in high school Algebra 2, Geometry, Pre-Calculus, and then she took an AP Stats class her senior year. Genevieve is currently a senior nursing student in college. And when she was in high school, she was doubly accelerated, so she took Geometry in the 8th grade. And her high school coursework included Algebra 2, and then she took Pre-Calculus, and then she actually went on and took Calculus AB and Calculus BC, which were offered as 2 separate courses in her school division. So we're going to be playing some audio clips as we go through the presentation today, and that will actually let you hear the voices of these particular students. And we're going to start just by letting these ladies introduce themselves. So Brian will play the clip for you.
All right, so my name is Sarah.
My name's Genevieve.
So I took Algebra 2 as a freshman in high school, and then I took Geometry following that.
My freshman year Algebra 2 class was particularly good. I remember doing a lot of group work in that class, and I worked closely with one of my friends who's good at math as well. And so it was a lot of fun to collaborate with her.
So we'll listen to those ladies as we go throughout the presentation today. But we also wanted you to have a voice in your mind of a student, a high school student that you might be able to think about as we talk about this initiative, because we think it's really important for us to be able to identify someone. It might be your own children or a family member. It might be a student you taught in high school or someone you interacted with in high school. That might be even yourself as a high school student. But we'd like for you to type the name of a high school student in the chat box. And then as we go through the presentation today, use this student along with Sarah and Genevieve as another lens through which to view the work that we're doing. So it looks like everybody can come up with someone that you can keep in your mind. So we're going to provide you now with some background information about the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative and how it originated. So there are 3 books about catalyzing change in mathematics, and the first was published in 2018, and it was titled Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics, Initiating Some Critical Conversations. And then this particular book is what we used for a catalyst for our conversations here in Virginia. We actually had a book study, and we had several people in the book study that read the book and made some recommendations for what might happen in Virginia. But interestingly, in the book, they talk about the idea that Algebra 1 geometry and Algebra 2 was actually established in the late 1800s, and we've continued to have that model for high schools for mathematics. And really, in about 95% of our high schools across the country still have that particular model. So this Catalyzing Change in High School Math book really challenges educators to think differently about the purposes of high school mathematics. To think about some of our structures that we have that really might impede the equity that could exist in high school mathematics, and to analyze some of the current instructional practices through that lens of equity, thinking about what would be essential for students to learn in mathematics in high school. And so then the books that you see on the other side of that main on that screen are the Catalyzing Change in Early Childhood and Elementary School and Catalyzing Change in Middle School, which were just published this last spring 2020. And they reiterate a key set of recommendations that can be articulated across all the grade levels. So I think Shelley's putting into the chat box for you a link to the key recommendation document that shows how those recommendations expand over time. and over the different grade levels. And we don't expect you to read this right now, but we wanted to give you that as a reference so that you have it for future reading. So when we think about our current mathematics pathways, it somewhat can resemble a tall pine tree. All the branches kind of grow out of the same tree trunk, and they all point up, and they point in a common direction towards the peak of the tree. But the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative is proposing pathways that look more like the tree on the right, where there is a common set of strong roots in the ground and a big, strong tree trunk to start from. But then it allows for the tree to branch out and offer several different options for students to learn mathematics. So we want to let Genevieve share some thoughts about her experiences in the current mathematics pathway structure.
Looking back on my high school experience, one of the frustrations that I have is that our classrooms were so separated from a very early age, depending on if you were thought to be in the advanced classes versus being better able to thrive in the more grade level courses. And I think that really affected my high school experience in a way that might not have been as positive.
So Genevieve talks a little about her frustration with the current math pathways and how sometimes students are directed down specific pathways based on their perceived ability. So on slide 9, we look at the idea that the additional background about the Virginia Mathematics Pathways does rely on some data. And most of us are pretty familiar with our mathematics SOL pass rates. This one is actually the latest that we have from spring 2019. And you can see all students for in Virginia, for the Virginia Standards of Learning Assessments, the average was an 82% pass rate. And then the bars below that show that broken down by different student groups so that you can see where there might be some gaps in our student achievement. And so the bars really reference where we're going past that 82% and where we're not quite hitting that mark. And so the VMPI really seeks to increase opportunities and remove barriers for learning math so that every student can have that opportunity to achieve in their education and toward their career goals. So we do have a web page for the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative, and I think there's a link that we're going to add to the chat box. You can link and see that web page from that link, but you can also use the QR code that's available here, and that QR code is also on that infographic that you have. So there's several kind of ways to get there. Thanks, Brian. We also wanted to include this particular set of data, and it really sort of correlates to the data that we saw with our SOL pass rates, and it's from the Virginia Community College System. It looks at students from 2017 to 2018 that were enrolled in a 2-year public institution who had to take developmental mathematics before they could take a college credit-bearing mathematics course. And if you look at the student groups that are listed at the bottom, you can see that it's very similar to the student group gaps that we were seeing in the last slide. That's also, that one was on your infographic as well. So earlier we gave you that analogy that the current math pathways are kind of like a pine tree where all the branches point all upward in the same direction. And oftentimes we hold that pathway to calculus as that pathway that we think all the students should be traveling down. However, we have to start asking some of these critical questions. Might there be other rigorous pathways that students might want to take that will lead them to their chosen college or career path? So the national data that's being referenced in this particular slide and is also included on your infographic is exhibits that approximately 28% of college majors actually require a course in analytical calculus. And while calculus is still a course that a lot of kids need for STEM and related fields, there's also a lot of courses in statistics and mathematical modeling or data science and other technical math that might be more applicable to students who are pursuing other fields or interests. So to continue on with this discussion about calculus, there was another national study that looked at, in 2017, national data about what mathematics courses students were taking in college who had completed a calculus course in high school. And so you can see on the right-hand side of this, this slide, it says that about 19% of students actually took calculus 2 or higher, so they moved on from the calculus that they took in high school. 19% retook calculus and did pretty well. They earned an A or a B. About 13% retook calculus and earned a C or lower. Another 33% actually took a level of mathematics that is a prerequisite for calculus, like pre-calculus or college algebra, or even remedial mathematics. And then another 19% took a different non-calculus mainstream course, like a business calculus or a statistics course. So again, thinking about even those students that are taking calculus in high school, how many of them are having to retake courses anyhow? So what's the rush for us to point everybody towards this race to calculus? So why should we be examining mathematics education in Virginia? Well, oftentimes we know students develop these unproductive mathematical identities. They sometimes feel like I'm not a math person, or I wasn't born with that math gene. And some students really fail just to see how is math applicable in their real lives. In addition, the math skills that we needed to function, 25 or 30 years ago in today's society really aren't the ones that we needed, that we needed back then. So the application of mathematics in college and careers is increasing, and we're definitely seeing that. And also the use of math in a democratic society is really imperative. I'm sure you've been watching all of the election results and the graphs and the charts and the polls and the surveys, and we want students to be able to ask very particular questions about that so that they can make sure that the information that they're receiving is reliable and it's valid information. So we always want to, make sure that we're preparing students for the world in which they live, to be productive citizens, to be in a democratic society. We also hear about how high school math content is a mile wide and an inch deep, and it lacks focus and it lacks depth. And then we also hear a lot about the inequities in math education that exist for a multitude of different reasons. So in the chat box, there's an executive summary from the Catalyzing Change in High School Mathematics that's being downloaded for you. And then we're going to hear a little bit from Sarah and Genevieve about some of their experiences about why we should be catalyzing change.
So it did prepare me, but I wish I would have had some better fundamentals prior to taking some of those other courses.
I do feel very prepared entering into my college experience. I think that I gained a lot of good study tools in order to prepare myself for my education, but the actual academic content that I received in my math education does not apply to what I'll be really doing as a nurse.
So Sarah really felt like she could have been a little bit better prepared in the fundamentals of math. And then Genevieve felt like while she was prepared for college, she didn't feel like the math that she spent all that time learning is really going to be applicable to what she's going to be doing in a college or in a career. So we do want to discuss the VMPI through the lens of the Virginia Profile of a Graduate, which focuses on those 5 C's. This is on your infographic, and it talks about the idea that math curriculum really needs to prepare students a little bit better for success after high school, regardless of their intended career directions. The VMPI supports a curriculum that's rich and it's not rushed. through the development of mathematics curriculum that drastically reduces the need for acceleration and supports students being in more heterogeneous classrooms where we can begin to address some of the inequities that currently exist. Our students are going to be in a world where there's all different levels of ability. They're going to work with these people. They're going to live in those communities. And we want to make sure that our students are in classrooms where they're learning with those students as well. It's the world that we live in, and the inequities that currently exist, we need to find ways to minimize those. So some recent research really points to these beliefs about mixed achievement teaching for students of all levels. Some of you might be familiar with Dr. Jo Boaler. She's a professor at Stanford University, and she's the author of the book Mathematical Mindsets, which it really gives the proponent that reducing the need for acceleration in mathematics classrooms and teaching at a deeper level is really what we should be thinking about for all of our students. So this slide that's also a graphic on your info graphic is about the goals of the project. And you probably can already tell me what they are even without looking at this slide. And the first one is looking to improve equity in math for learning opportunities for all of our students. And then empowering students to be active participants in a quantitative world. Encouraging students to see themselves as knowers and doers of mathematics. And then identifying different K-12 mathematics pathways that will support future success for students, and so that they have some choices about what those pathways might be. And then collaborate with different stakeholders, which is very important for us to do to make sure that we're advancing math education for everyone. So let's hear a little bit from Genevieve about her viewpoint through the lens of equity and her mathematics experiences.
I think my experience could have been more beneficial had I been in a more equalized classroom environment where I got to be connected with a more diverse student body and had the opportunity to not only be pushed to achieve high level academically, but also be more involved in the experience of just living and learning in a community.
So Genevieve also shares that idea of a community of learners, and how perhaps her experience didn't really provide her with that opportunity as much as it possibly could have. So we're going to go ahead and get your feedback about your beliefs about access and equity in mathematics. Brian has launched a poll for you to just decide as educators in your division. So think about those people that you work with. Do they believe that the practice of isolating low achieving students in low level or slower paced math groups should be eliminated? So as we launch the poll, you're going to see, do you strongly agree, you're kind of neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. So we're going to go ahead and let you have a few minutes to vote, and then we'll see what the results are. So we have about 65% of you that have voted. So if you haven't had a chance to click on something on the screen, if you could take just a couple seconds to do that. So let's go ahead and end the poll, Brian, and we'll show the results. So you should be able to see that the most of you disagreed with that educators in your division believe the practice of isolating low achieving students should be eliminated. So we're kind of across the board in a lot of places. And so we really do need to have a lot of critical conversations about this, and what is it that should be happening? What is it that we should be thinking about to address some of the inequities? So we're going to close out the poll. It should hopefully leave your screen. And then we just want to think a little bit more about what does instruction look like for our students? So the questions shown on this slide both provide some opportunities for students to show their thinking around the concept of equality. The question on the left requires really very low levels of cognitive demand, where students simply have to identify the sentence or that displays an inequality. In contrast, the question on the right really requires higher levels of cognitive demand. Students are, in that question, are asked to create their own equality statements. They have to use the numbers 0 through 9 and then the 4 operation symbols. So this does a few things for kids. It allows an access point for all students to go ahead and access this problem, but it also gives multiple access points to every level of learner, and it targets the same content as the problem does on the left, but it gives a lot more opportunity for depth of understanding. And we know that there's a lot of inequities associated with isolating low achieving students in lower level or slower paced classrooms. Oftentimes we reserve questions like the one on the right for our accelerated students, and we think that students have to learn a certain amount of content before we can challenge them with questions like the one on the right. But we have to think about how some of our structures can change so that we can have students in more heterogeneous classrooms, so that we can all experience the challenging mathematics that all students should be learning. So we're going to let Genevieve share just a few more of her insights regarding the mathematics and the connections.
My experience was pretty different from a lot of my friends' experiences. I had a number of friends who struggled with math, even though they were, high achieving students in other courses. And I know that they had some frustrations with how math content was taught and just struggling to be able to really understand and connect the pieces.
So, and I've noticed that a lot of you in the chat box have been talking about some of your own experiences as in mathematics and as a math person. So, we definitely come to the table with a lot of different viewpoints, and having that child that you picked in your mind about high school mathematics and what it looked like is important as well. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and turn it over to Ian Shank, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about essential concepts in grades 8 through 10. I did want to, before I turn it over to you, Ian, recognize Jamie Levin. She's from VCU. She's on our VMPI team, and she is here joining us today as well. So thanks for being here, Jamie. All right, Ian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Tina. So I'm Ian. I'm on the Essential Concepts Committee, along with a large group of team members, some of whom are on this call with us today. Really want to talk about two main aspects of the overall Pathways Initiative. One of those being the idea of heterogeneous groupings of classes and eliminating some of that tracking. And I saw from that poll earlier, we're going to have some work to do, as some of you have recognized there's folks in your division who may not believe that it's appropriate to detrack. The other thing that we really want to focus on is what happens during high school. And think about our current system, where all of our students take Algebra 1, all of our students take geometry, some of our students then take Algebra 2. And that sequence of Algebra 1, geometry, and Algebra 2, if you look back through history, we've been doing that for almost 150 years, that exact same sequence, Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2. And what we've looked at is recognize that maybe there's some things in there that we need to start doing a little bit differently. And I'm thinking specifically about those struggling learners, where they get to us in Algebra 1, and if they are not successful, well, we just give them more equations and more of this and the same type of thing. Maybe we need to focus on something that might be more appropriate to allow students to recognize their world and expand their career opportunities and understand and critique what's happening around them. And so what our committee was tasked with was looking at those current Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2, thinking about those standards and asking ourselves a very deep question: is this a standard that all students need to know in high school? And in doing so, we created these new courses that we're calling the Essential Concepts courses. Essential Concepts for grade 8, essential concepts for grade 9, and essential concepts for grade 10. And in those courses, we made very purposeful and meaningful, real intra-disciplinary connections. How does the mathematics relate to and connect to other mathematical ideas? We also looked very carefully about that vertical alignment. How does what students do in K7 lead into essential concepts for grade 8, lead into essential concepts for grade 9, and essential concepts for grade 10? We also thought very critically about the conceptual understanding that its students are going to get from these courses, not just a checklist of what students need to be able to do, but a wider, broader idea of things that students must understand to be successful in where they go, wherever they go after they leave us from their mathematics courses. And that bottom line is, what does every single student have to have experience with in a high school mathematics program? On the next slide, Brian, we've looked at these guiding documents from the Catalyzing Change that Tina talked about earlier, and then compared that to what we currently do in grades 8 all the way up through Algebra 2, and had that critical question of, is this a concept that every single student needs to have? And in some cases, we looked at our frameworks and said, hey, they're solving equations. Everybody needs to solve an equation. So the solving an equation is an essential concept, and it'll be something students learn in that Essential Concepts 8 through 10 program. But then we had some other conversations about something like the ratio of intersecting chords inside a circle. Today, that's a very cool mathematics topic, but is that something that all students need to be able to know and understand? And that was a case where our committee said, no, that's not going to be an essential understanding for mathematics. And then in other cases, we looked at things that aren't currently in our curriculum. Tina gave that great example about all the polls and statistics and everything that's going on, that's happening in our world now, and how great it would be if a high school student would have the experience to know what it means when I see a poll has a margin of error of 4%, and not jumping to conclusions. I think our high school students would be much better prepared than some of the pundits we saw on television interpreting some of those polls. So that's data analysis that we believe is an essential concept, is going to be part of our essential concept courses. Well, the next slide, Brian, in the context of going through the essential concepts, we identified that everything fell within a couple of main strands that you see on the screen. And these strands are going to be interwoven throughout our essential concepts courses. And let me be totally clear. We are talking about taking Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, those three courses that we've known and loved for 150 years, and removing them from our high school mathematics program, replacing them with essential concepts for grade 8, 9, and 10. And in those essential concepts, we're going to try to frame everything through the lens of mathematical modeling. How can we take a real world problem and develop our mathematical ideas and mathematical concepts by trying to solve that real world problem? And in the process of solving that real world problem, we're going to learn about data analysis. We are going to learn about functions and algebra. So don't get the wrong idea. We're not getting rid of some of those key algebraic ideas. Some of those algebraic ideas are very much essential, and they're still in these courses. Spatial reasoning, ideas about area and volume and triangles, we believe are essential for all students to know. And then probability. Probability, in my opinion, is one of the most misunderstood concepts throughout all of mathematics. And maybe that's because we do just a little bit of it in early middle school and then never touch it again. But we believe probability is an essential concept to understand the chance of things happening in our world. And we're going to include that in our essential concept courses. So our next slide highlights a little bit of what I was talking about earlier with those intradisciplinary connections, those real connections. So think about how we might do this in grade 8. So think about grade 8, all of our students will be in a heterogeneously grouped class and taking essential concepts 8 at the same time. We might start that grade level by talking about how we would collect and represent bivariate data, going out and collecting height and weight on individuals, for example. And then that's a very natural place to talk about probability. What's the chance if I went out and did this again that I would get the exact same data? What's the probability that the next person I talk to is taller than 6 feet tall? Then once we've got bivariate data, now we're going to represent that with data with a linear model. Let's put it on the graph and fit a line to it. And now once we fit a line to it, it makes perfect sense to then continue on and talk about the characteristics of a linear function. But now, instead of talking about y equals mx plus b as this abstract concept m and this abstract concept b, we're talking about slope and y-intercept in a real life context. Once we've got characteristics of a linear function, we're going to solve linear equations. And then we'll also be transforming linear functions. We'll talk about what happens when we change the slope and y-intercept and the effect that has on the line. And then if we're talking about transformations of a linear function, we'll be talking about transforming a plane figure in space. So this is how we might arrange our 8th grade year. As you see, essential concepts, things we believe every student needs experience with, but taught in an interdisciplinary way where we're making connections along the way so that students have a richer and deeper understanding. Our next steps for the essential concepts. We've got a draft list out that we're currently soliciting feedback on. We're looking for people to tell us that, yes, what you included is essential for all students. We're also wanting people to tell us, you took this out and you probably shouldn't have. That's the type of feedback we're looking for. We're also wanting to identify and include meaningful interdisciplinary connections. And this is one of the things that excites me the most about having these heterogeneously grouped D-tracked classes. Think about an 8th grade year. All of the students currently, all of them take civics. All of them take English language arts in grade 8, and all of them take some type of physical science class. So think about how we might do a cross-curricular lesson with civics. So in civics, they may go out and talk about the political side about a poll, and then in our math class, we can talk about the mathematics behind it, and a real deep connection that just is not possible in our current system. We're also looking to update and redesign our curriculum framework. I've noticed in the chat, several of you are math coaches, so you know that our curriculum framework is very much written as a checklist. And it implies that we're going to teach this, and the kids are going to do this, and then this, and then this. Our new system, we want to focus on conceptual understanding and making some real meaningful alignment with our process goals. And then we also need to support teachers in how to implement them. We know that teachers may not have been trained in how to do that. So we need to supply teachers with the tools to do this real deep interdisciplinary work. Genevieve's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
This mixed bag of knowing that like the math program worked for me, but I also know some of my friends who didn't necessarily, it wasn't like they hated math, they just didn't feel like they always got support from teachers in the way that could really help them thrive.
So think about what Genevieve just said, and I don't know if you remember, Genevieve is our young lady who is doubly accelerated. So she took Algebra 2 in 9th grade. And I want you to picture your school and your division. If it's anything like mine and where I taught, she probably had the best teachers because she went from Algebra 2 and then she went up in these AP classes. She probably didn't have our first year teachers or maybe our struggling teachers. Because what do we typically do with our struggling teachers? We give them to the students who need them the most, who need the rich teaching the most. And so hopefully in the process of this detracking of students, we're also going to detrack teachers as well. So that's a little bit about what's going to be happening in grades 8, 9, and 10. And grades 8, 9, and 10 are going to build directly on what happens in grades K through 7. So if 8, 9, and 10 are our essential concepts, grades K through 7 are our foundational concepts. So in those foundational concepts, on the next slide, Brian, we've got a graphic here of the different strands that you see. And notice how similar these strands are. So the foundational, where they're learning the same thing that they've currently done, how now that's going to build directly into those essential courses in grades 8 through 10 to really hammer home that real vertical alignment. How many times have you all asked the question, why do we do Algebra 1 and then geometry and then come back out to Algebra 2? Well, we're not going to deal with that anymore because we're doing integrated ideas and connected ideas. And then our next steps for those K through 7. Remember, the idea behind K7 are going to be foundational concepts that are taught in heterogeneous groups that are D-tracked so that all our grade level students are learning grade level content at the same time. So in order to help teachers with that, our next steps are going to be to update and redesign the curriculum framework to help teachers with those process goals and really look specifically for differentiation, because differentiation is going to be the key. How does a teacher work with one student who they feel like, this student got something really, really quick and this other student didn't? How can we differentiate to go deeper rather than faster? How can we differentiate to be able to reduce the need for acceleration? That if a student seems to be getting math really quickly, then let's go deeper and make sure that they have that strong foundational understanding. Sarah talked with us a little earlier about maybe feeling a lack of foundational understanding. She's going to talk a little more about that now.
So there was a lot of times where I had to relearn subjects because a lot of the ways I think that us kids are taught is memorize, forget, so you have more storage room, and then continue.
So we need to be very careful that we're teaching not for memorization, but teaching for understanding and differentiating in the process so that all students have that rich foundation so that then everybody has the opportunity to do whatever they want in grades 11 and 12, which might be calculus, but it might be something else that's more appropriate to them. But what we're doing is making sure that all of our students have that opportunity for success. And in order to make our students have that opportunity for success, we have to build those opportunities for our teachers to be able to develop that type of understanding in their students. On the next slide, I'm going to invite you to go to the chat, and I've seen several ideas in the chat already related to this idea, and not even without even being prompted. So I want you to take a few minutes and think about that heterogeneous grouping of classes, which is very different than the way we currently do in a lot of divisions across the state. And I'd love for you to just jot a couple of very quick ideas, maybe just a couple of words in that chat window. What are some positive outcomes that you think might come by doing heterogeneous groupings of students from kindergarten all the way through grade 10, rather than doing an ability grouping approach that we see now? Tamika, that idea about increasing student self-confidence is just so key to this. We see a lot about developing students' identity as a mathematics learner. And students develop that identity, and you were talking about this in the chat earlier, they see themselves as I'm a math person or I'm a not math person based on what math class that they're in. And to me, that just is, that's an awful thing that we're doing to kids, is that we're teaching them about whether they're good or not, whether they're smart or not, based on what math class they're in ninth grade. There's so many great things in the chat. I encourage you to read through those, scroll back up through those other ideas. But I'm going to stop talking. I alluded a little bit to what's going to happen in 11th and 12th grade. And I want to turn it over to Brian to delve more into what's going to be happening in 11th and 12th grade.
Thank you, Ian. Sorry, my mouse isn't working very well here. Yeah, I want to say as well that like Ian, I'm representing a group of dedicated people who have been exploring this for a while. And we get the chance to talk about 11th and 12th grade. And I want you to reflect back on that image of the trees that we began with, and that current pine tree that everything kind of points to a singular point versus the tree that branches outward. And the pathway group really gets to explore that outward diverse areas of mathematics that students get to explore. And if you go back to your infographic, you can see it here on the screen, or you can pull up your copy. Ian has done a really good job. He started in the black box there for 8 through 10. He went back and looked at the K through 7, and I get to spend a little bit of time on the really big, tall gray box on the right-hand side. And before we talk about some of the changes, I really want to emphasize some things that we're not changing. We're not taking away some of the rich, deep math classes that we have already. Pre-calculus is still an option. AP calculus, dual enrollment courses, international baccalaureate options, like those deep, rich, STEM focused courses, statistics, AP statistics, those courses are still a part of this math pathways option. Along with that, we want to add in a quantitative reasoning course. Dealing with reasoning and data is more important than ever. That is a current existing course in the Virginia Community College system that really would partner well with our approach here and would make a really great dual enrollment option for high school students. But the place that with the 11th and 12th grade gets a little bit different are some half credit options. And we want to create an opportunity where students can both specialize or they can sample depending on where they are as an 11th and 12th grade student. And so to kind of demonstrate that, I want you to think about some of these different students. Genevieve is a nurse, and she mentioned that, you know, she had some good math and it helped her think, but it didn't really point her towards her health pathway. If Genevieve was a student under the VMPI program, she would have a lot of flexibility to take the courses she was interested in. But if she needed a nudge, some recommendations might be for her to take a mathematical modeling class in her junior year, and along with that, a data science class. And Genevieve happened to be in a STEM academy when she was in high school, and so she could have partnered really nicely with a biotechnology class that she was taking there. And Ian kind of alluded to this idea that this more consistent sequence is going to allow better interdisciplinary partnerships for courses. And so there's an example of how that could work. And then for a potential nurse to take a quantitative reasoning class would align very well with her future goals as well. So that would be one sample pathway for somebody entering a health career. And you can see that we are orienting this around the career clusters. These are the different outcomes that a student might have post high school. And we have in mind different ways that a student could map it backwards. And we're already, you know, developing in like beta stages of what it would look like for there to be an app for guidance counselors to help coach their students. You know, where do you see yourself going after high school, whether that's through a college path or a non-college path? Okay, let's map backwards what types of courses would be a good fit for you. If somebody else were headed in a STEM field, this might be the kind of pointy part of that current pine tree that everything currently points towards. It's still an option there. They would take a pre-calculus and a trigonometry course. Those courses might have some of the similar things of a pre-calculus class has now. However, they would be designed specifically for somebody coming out of those essential concepts courses. And then they could still take a calculus class, perhaps partnered with a physics class, to make a really strong STEM supported pathway for a student. But not all of our students are in that, you know, narrow current path. Think about an arts student, somebody who really wants to, you know, grow their artistic side of their thinking. Sometimes they currently in our system that is a pointy pine tree think, well, that means I'm not a math student. But our whole idea here is that math is so much broader. That think of the broad tree there. Math is so much broader, and it applies to all of these different areas. An art student would be directed towards a geometry and design class, perhaps co-taught with an art teacher, and an art class and a geometry class could be really, you know, tied together nicely to think about architecture and different artistic ideas. And schools would have the flexibility to do some of these interdisciplinary pairings. Taking a trigonometry class, there would be a lot of different ways that trigonometry could tie into an artistic way of thinking about the world. And then again, we said schools have a lot of flexibility. Individual students have a lot of flexibility to mix and match these courses, but a school could also have the flexibility to just take two of those courses and bundle them together as a single course. So somebody going into arts might want to take some mathematical modeling and financial modeling. A lot of our art students end up needing to have some sort of understanding of their financial futures, as they may even find themselves in their own, you know, responsible for their own business. And so that would be a possible pathway for that student, but there would be many other options for art students as well. And again, I want to emphasize that for that student who knows where they're headed in those career clusters, we can map a class pathway back for them. But for that student who doesn't know where they're headed, they can be thinking about mapping forward. If a student thinks back on their previous experiences and is realizing that, you know, every time I had an activity or a task that dealt with geometry, those were the ones that got me excited. Well, that could nudge them towards the geometry and design. Or maybe another student says, all those times where I was finding patterns and I was doing some sort of modeling, those were the activities that really kind of got me excited. And so that student could be tracked more towards the mathematical modeling or the financial modeling. So students can think about where they want to be in the future and use that to help guide their 11th and 12th grade. Or if they don't know, then they can go back and look at what their previous successes are, or the previous areas that got them excited, and that could help inform them. Most of our students don't know what data science is, but we want to flag those types of activities or any of these different areas as they're in their K through 10th experience. And so as they do an activity or a task or, you know, some sort of time where they're engaging with mathematics, we'll remind them, hey, by the way, this is a place that, you know, it isn't trigonometry yet, but it might kind of, if it's making sense to you now when we're talking about angles here, trigonometry might be something to think about in the future. So as we're building these courses and kind of designing them, one of the exciting things is that some of these courses are able to be developed in advance. And some of these courses, even students that are in our current algebra, geometry, algebra sequence could take a data science or a discrete or a sets and logic class. You know, those classes don't currently exist. They're not something that's available to high school students. And so some of those courses will be rolling out potentially even before some of the essential concepts classes. And so we're looking to have groups to pilot some of those. And so we are, just like the essential concepts, we're still in the soliciting feedback. We're starting to design some of these courses. We're starting to bring teams together to work on data science. And we're trying to partner with industry people and colleges to make sure that the courses that we're designing truly are preparing students for these different pathways. We really want to go heavy on the interdisciplinary connections and that ability to be a little more sequential in the way that we're moving through more deliberately rather than just racing through as fast as possible, but going much deeper rather than faster. That will enhance the opportunity to do those interdisciplinary connections. So we need to partner with our colleagues in other subject areas to make sure that our standards and their standards are aligning well to create good pairings of courses. And we need to work on developing these courses even further. Right now, they're ideas, and we want to get into the details of making them work and providing really rich resources for schools and teachers to implement these courses. And we will have a phased-in model of piloting these new courses. So if you or somebody in your district is interested in being an early adopter on some of those courses that are in those module courses, feel free to let us know, and we would love to, you know, include your district in some of that piloting. And by piloting those early on, before it's available statewide, that will allow us to make sure that the resources are really fully well developed, so that when those things flush out to all districts, that they are able to be supported well. So in the chat box, go ahead, and as you've seen now a K through 12 picture, what are some of those things that excite you about the Pathways Initiative? Feel free to think just a little bit and then drop in your thoughts. I saw in the chat that people are asking questions about pathways for specific careers. I showed you a couple of examples here of how an art trajectory, what kind of courses they would be mapped towards. We are building those out for all different careers, and those would be careers that are travel through a college pathway, as well as those that are direct entry or go through trade school or military. So, you know, these 4 exit off ramps to high school can point towards these different career clusters. And so whether a student is going into a health pathway through, going to undergrad and med school, that would be a pathway. Some students are going to a health pathway to become a CNA. And so that would be more of a, a trade or a, getting a certificate so that they would be prepared. And so that student would also have a pathway. So we've shown 2 examples here, but there would be aligned examples for students exiting high school at all different ways. And there is valuable mathematics that students can be learning at a high school level that will speak to them. We want to really emphasize that these courses, whether they're the half credit modules or the whole credit modules, are not lesser than. They're deep, rich courses, just like our calculus courses. But we want to make sure that we're speaking to students in the math that they're going to be using in their future.
All right, well, Brian and Ian, thank you so much for sharing. As you can tell, we're very excited about this initiative and all of the opportunities that it seems to open for students. We appreciate all of the comments and the great questions that you all have in the chat box. So we wanted to end by just giving you an update on the status of the initiative. So Brian, if you could go to the next slide. There are some national efforts in this same vein in mathematics education, and we've linked up with quite a few of them. There is a high school to college mathematics pathways forum through the Board of Mathematical Sciences, and it is a cohort currently of 23 states that are trying to look at what does high school math connecting into the workforce and into college, how does that look differently than what it looks like now? So we're fortunate to be able to talk with other states that are going down similar paths to share our ideas. The Charles A. Dana Center in Texas also has a report out called the Launch Years, and it reimagines mathematics education. There's also a position paper out from the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics called Closing the Opportunity Gap, a call for detracking mathematics. And then also a lot about social justice. We know if you've read anything in education, that social justice and is just a big topic that we need to be addressing. So mathematics education and that lens as well. All of these links are on the website, the VMPI website that we had posted in the chat box earlier. So you should be able to get to those through those links. So Brian, if you could click to the next slide. This is the tentative timeline for the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative. It does dovetail very nicely with our revisions that we currently make every 7 years to the standards of learning. Those are scheduled to be revised in 2023. That's when they would go to the board for a final approval. So you can see that we're currently in the process of developing the math essential concepts. And then from there, we're going to start looking at committees to pull together the standards of learning that would go along with those concepts, and then to start looking K all the way up through our higher level courses to review all of the math standards of learning and to have the opportunity to articulate across the different grade levels so that by the time 2025-26 comes around, we've got implementation of those essential concept courses that Ian talked about. And along with this will come possibly some changes to our graduation requirements in mathematics for students. So all of that are things that we are currently working on. So on the next slide, Brian, we have an opportunity for you to ask some additional questions. It looks like you all have started doing that, talking about what a crosswalk year might look like. And that's a great question, Adam, because the crosswalk year is going to be a little bit more complicated than what we've had in the past with the changes that we're looking at. So we have a lot of things to think about, and we need all of you to give us your feedback, to ask your questions. To have people looking at this from different perspectives is going to be vitally important to making this actually be a success. And we know the proposals that we have right now will probably morph and change as we talk to more stakeholders and we learn more about what's the best way to go about doing this. But we certainly have a lot of great folks. Our math community is always just wonderful and can support us in that charge. So just we're at our time limit right now. We do have a survey, so you can continue to share your thoughts and ask your questions. There's a link in the chat box that is being put there so that you can click on that link and share out your thoughts further. We do want to thank you for taking time today on a busy Monday. I know Mondays are always busy to take some time out and share it with us today. We're super excited about this. We hope that we've piqued your interest, and we look forward to seeing you in some of the other information and communication that will be forthcoming. So have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Ryan, if you can go to the last slide, then you could share how to connect with Tina if we need to at VOE. Thanks.
Yeah, Beth, we can click back. Brian, do you mind clicking back to the timeline slide? And Beth, the timeline is also on the infographic that we shared in the email, and it was shared in the chat box as well. So you'll have that, and email me if you need to as well. We can certainly share it again. Yeah, if our VMPI team could just hold back for a few minutes, we'll debrief at the end of this as people exit the meeting. So thank you.
Do we want to stop recording too?
Yes, thank you.